I've seen some quiet and creepy games before, but nothing has been as purposely vague and recently demanded as the new 3D side-scroller, Inside. I'll be honest, the request for an explanation of this game kind of came out of nowhere all at once, but I enjoyed following through on the lead for sure. An easy purchase on Steam or Xbox One, Inside is an indie game by Playdead Studios that opens with a noticeably different atmosphere than most. Very quiet, with no real instruction than to press any button to begin. No introduction follows to present your main character, and nothing is provided in terms of instruction. It's up to you to figure out what you're doing with no help provided by the game's developers, and this keeps up throughout the entire experience. If you want to make progress, it's up to you to figure out how. And this approach is taken with the storyline and world build as well, which is exactly why explanations have been so demanded. With no setup provided, you're dropped into a dark universe draped in gray tones and devoid of life. The only people you see are of two classes, masters and mind slaves. Your first moment catching sight of people makes it very clear the world is not right. Men wearing all black and wearing masks close a truck filled with people. The truck drives off and we next see a pair of masked men outside of a kind of pod with a round window. These men are spaced out in groups along your path, armed with attack dogs, guns, and flashlights, and getting past them all takes quick thinking and fast movement. Finding out where the people taken by these shady individuals end up doesn't take you very long. You next spot them just past a farm, lined up alongside a truck, standing in a very orderly fashion. They're later caught marching along under the supervision of armed men, and a later opportunity provides you a close-up. Everyone here has a full zombie shuffle, and a camera can be seen watching them on the left. After passing through a room of other escapees taken down by spotlight-assisted turrets, you find yourself in the same position as the marching people, being carefully monitored by a camera and the mask-wearing individuals. Among them are children and even someone holding a baby. They watch closely as their captives are put through a series of behavior tests you must mimic to survive, until an attack dog finally senses you and you're on the run again. The people wearing masks aren't the only ones controlling a group of zombie-like herds beneath them. Throughout the game, your character uses what can only be called mind control helmets to gain assistance from other drones for puzzle-solving efforts. Anytime you hook into a mind control helmet, you can gain some new friends to run around and accomplish tasks, and can even use one under your control to activate another mind control helmet, which in turn channels down to another zombie state individual. Almost all of these people have the appearance of workers. There's a moment where you encounter a complex full of construction workers who stand around until you assume direct control. And if that's not eerie enough, we also have attacking mermaids with severely overgrown hair, a whole area being assaulted by a blast cannon with the power to destroy your entire body, piles of dead bodies and limbs from both humans and pigs, reverse gravity pools of water, mutilated zombies, and a giant, horrifying blob of people crushed into one organic mass. None of this is explained to you by the game. It's there to be seen by players and, if they can manage it, interpreted by putting the pieces together and deriving meaning. Inside sure does give you a lot to work with, however. You just need to be willing to find it. The game has 14 secret orbs connected to unseen machines that have to be dismantled, unlocking an achievement while sometimes providing more clues to the story. Find all of them, and you'll be given a chance to find the source of all the orbs for an alternate ending. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a bit on that one, and it's no surprise why. Finding the secrets insinuates that all we really need to see are in the rooms with the orbs, or at the secret ending, but Inside is an experience that works entirely with visual storytelling. It's when you examine the surroundings you would normally run through blindly that you start to understand more. And believe me when I tell you, a second or even third playthrough is necessary to really grasp it. One of the major concerns a player will have after escaping from the masked men who begin shooting at you in the woods is to really, truly make sure you've gotten clear of them. You'll be so occupied with getting through that after seeing the dead pigs on the riverbank and realizing your own death is still close enough to catch you. Running through the farm chapter without analyzing your surroundings is too easy to do. This is where we really need to begin slowing down to examine where we are. By taking on the challenge of visual storytelling during Inside, we can discover the lore of its world build and what's really going on and receive the artistic messages told in this particular story. We'll start with the question that's been on everyone's mind watching a playthrough or playing the game on their own. What is even going on here? As previously said, there are more than a few moments in the game where puzzle solving is achieved by collecting followers. You primarily do this using mind control helmets, and while those devices have been a long-time staple of sci-fi, they often don't just work on their own. In the world of Inside, we find this to be somewhat true. While going through the farm chapter, just after escaping from the masked men in the woods rounding people up, you'll discover a lot more dead pigs than you saw on the riverbank. After jumping off of a barn roof and onto a cart full of corpses and moving it to make progress, you'll notice that underneath the cart, there are a whole lot of things. Very strange, long creatures that can only be described as overgrown worms. You'll catch more of them in the dirt on the other side of the platform you cross after moving the cart, and then see them slowly wiggling around in the corpse of a pig behind you. As you head towards the next building, you'll spot 2 more pigs with worms inside of them, one of which wakes up from the dead and comes after your character. Once you've run the pig into a wall, it will be dazed enough to move under the mind control helmet in the middle of the room. Naturally, it's time to move that pig, so you grab hold of its backside to pull and rip its tail right off. At least, that's what you're going to assume happens if you're not watching closely. Looking at the pig as it runs around, you'll see that one of the worms are sticking out of its back end, just under the tail, and it's the worm you end up removing, which leaves the pig docile enough to be pushed into place and then just stand there. With that worm connected to the pig, it had been aggressive. Now it was fine. And while this pig was still alive despite the parasite attached to it, the others outside hadn't done so well. What we're looking at with this worm is a type of parasite. That's why so many of them could be found underneath the cart of dead pigs. With no living bodies to feed off of, the worms left the host bodies and collected in a pile underneath the area they'd fallen off. During a much later chapter, you'll find several people suspended in a body of water supported by reverse gravity, with many of these worms attached to them. You release a group of these people moments later to help with a task. They're more of the zombie state followers from earlier, but now misshapen and missing limbs. You can even spot one without a head that still manages to follow you. Those lost body parts can be spotted falling out of a dumpster chute in an area that comes before this part of the game. This is what's happening to the people who are being collected. While running around this building, you can see a group of them in a cage who are picked up and carried away. In the same general area, you'll catch sight of the strange pods from the woods with round windows sitting in storage. These were containment pieces for the captives before they could be loaded onto trucks and taken away. People normally don't just stand around and allow themselves to be kidnapped. These pods probably had a hand in making them easier to control and herd onto trucks. But why all the kidnapping, mind control, and body mutilation? What does the organization or company in control of this operation have to gain from this? Or for that matter, the different types of mutated people trapped in glass observation cubes with cameras trained on them? Whatever it is, the workers inside this building, who seem very much not under mind control and haven't been visibly mutilated, are highly interested in the outcome. Quite a lot of people can be seen running into the building on your way up and working their way past you to look through the glass of a large dome on the same level as the observation rooms. It's quite a shock to see normal people after running through the game at this point, but that shock is outperformed by discovering what you find in the dome, which turns out to be a water tank. After getting sucked in, your character loses his clothes and then approaches a giant mass of bodies crushed together into one horrific organic mass. There are 4 mind control helmets attached to this blob of flesh, limbs, and organs, and they seem to be in standby mode without the usual ring of lights glowing for active mind control. After pulling away 3 helmets, your character is sucked into the blob and absorbed, giving you control of the entire mass, which then breaks open the tank and floods the room. This leads into the most shocking and, to be honest, hilarious turn of events as you rampage through the building, aided in your escape by some followers from earlier. Chaos and destruction are the only things you achieve throughout your run up until crashing into the office of a very prominent figure in the company. You run him right over, knocking him out of a glass window and then crushing him in the most violent scene in the game. It's the only time your character has ever caused a death, and the blood is all over your misshapen blob body. It's after this point that employees of the company aid you in your escape until it's revealed to be a trap, which, as the unstoppable mass of people, you manage to break out of and escape to freedom, crashing through the outer wall of the building, tumbling down a hillside, and finally ending up on the beach, where you lay bathed in sunlight and free at last as the game finally ends. The masses of people you had encountered on the way to this point were progressions of the final stage. Normal mind slaves in full clothing, barely clothed, misshapen bodies, and at the end, one horrible mass of organic matter. Levels of treatment for each group resulted in their state, and everyone in the building seemed to be headed for the organic mass. But why? Why even create such a horror in the first place? One of the earliest moments of mind control puzzle solving in the game shows us. It's the cipher key to the question about what this company is doing. Your player character uses a mind control helmet to move one of the zombified people, who then plugs into another helmet to control yet another mental zombie. Together, the player character and the first zombie move in the way they need the second zombie to move in the chain of command. One regular person can control a mind slave, who can also control mind slaves. Looking at the blob at the end of the game in its tank, we can see 4 helmets attached, and judging by how many limbs are sticking out of this thing, it's foolish to think that there aren't any heads or brains inside of this mass. It's also attached to one giant arm, keeping it in place that may have additional purposes, and as previously stated, the mind control helmets are not actually active yet. They don't have that same golden glow as the active ones we've already seen. Because a zombie guided by an active mind can control other mind slaves, and because we know this interconnected mass of bodies knows how to work in unison to accomplish a goal, we can suspect it's operating on at least 4 connected brains at once inside one giant body. That's 4 times the brain power of a normal mind slave. Get an entire network of them together under one control helmet for a brain that still has free will, and you can control a whole lot of people all at once, moving entirely in unison. And then, because you've already learned how to stitch several human bodies into one living organic mass, you could always take your body modification process a few steps further and create different models of mind slave depending on what you need to do. That's what this company appears to be doing, collecting human beings for the combined efforts of mind control and extreme genetic modification. Their primary effort seems to be the creation of these mass organic bodies, which can serve as central nodes of control to operate many groups of mental slaves. It's not the first time they've done this type of thing either. In the game, you'll encounter a type of being living underwater with extremely overgrown hair, which is afraid of bright lights. This enemy tries to attack and drown you at every opportunity and finally succeeds in doing so, dragging you into the depth, and then placing a device on your chest that brings you back to life and gives you the power to breathe underwater too. Once you gain sense of your new condition, you swim upward, followed by a group of fish, and head into an area that looks just like the one at the end of the game, with observation rooms from the facility. Folding chairs are set up in the same way as before, and even though there aren't any cameras left hanging around, when you first wake up before entering this area, there are several VHS tapes laying around in the glow of the fluorescent light. Back in the observation area that's been flooded, you can see a body still connected to wires floating around, lifeless, and another approaches a window that you pass by. Both of these shapes look like the modified human beings from the final area of the game. It also helps to see as you exit that the floor is marked 3 for Zone 3, and the active building for the company at the end of the game is marked Zone 4. While tearing apart devices built by the company as part of the game's secret rooms, you'll also encounter a photography darkroom that earns you the achievement Field Research with a description that says, Unearthing Secrets. Hang out long enough in the darkroom and you'll see a picture of the long-haired underwater enemy and people in a cage. There are several cameras and rolls of film sitting on tabletops. Not only did the company once own the area of Zone 3, they've been documenting what lives down there after the flood, which is why the game includes a submersible you steal from a company employee in the first place. Someone has been using it to keep track of old experiments. This previous work in creating humans who can breathe underwater probably led to the company's use of the technology in the new batch of mind slaves, who are also suspended in water and are still clearly alive after being pulled or dropped out of it. And finally, let's not forget the reward for finding all of those devices like the one in the photography darkroom. After collecting all of them, you'll be allowed to use a panel in the same underground bunker where you found the darkroom to unlock a door, which leads to a massive computers with wires hooked up to a mind control helmet. You can open a gate on the wall and unplug the entire system for good, which then seems to give your character the same hunched over appearance as mind control victims who aren't being used, almost as if you've been deactivated. It's been theorized by a few early players who found this secret ending that you were also being controlled the entire time, primarily by the Blob who compelled you to free it and join the mass body at the end. This area of discussion gets us more into the secondary meaning of things just beyond the world building, which we can now begin to talk about. As soon as you enter the area of the farm from the start of the game, you'll be greeted by some small golden chicks who will follow you wherever you go. Your objective is to get them inside the barn where they can be sucked up into a machine that pelts a hay bale with chicks until it falls over. The natural reaction to this scenario is that you really hope the game developers don't want you to actually do that. I remember looking for any other way in the room I could find to avoid killing them before realizing I had no choice. Thankfully, after putting the chicks through the machine, they all miraculously survive. At first glance. Taking a closer look at the scene, you'll see that one chick didn't make it through the ordeal. This isn't the only time something like this happens either. At a later point, when you're gathering friends with your mind control helmet in the construction complex to open a door, you may find that you don't have quite enough to meet the quota of 19. In order to finish the puzzle, you need to drag and drop a dead construction worker onto the platform. And even later, when you gather a group of zombie followers who are misshapen and missing limbs, they collapse to the floor after being suspended in water, and not only do some of them lose appendages, a few don't get back up after you drop them to help you. Then, when approaching your next major mass of people, the blob, another casualty occurs. You. This time, during interaction with a group, you become the major loss that occurs as a result of the meeting, meshing with the blob to become one mass body. During Inside, you can pick up on a lot of themes. Yes, you can see the dystopian future. Yes, mind control and mass manipulation is in there as well. But in the midst of playing, you come to find that your interactions with groups always result in at least one loss. Somewhere along the line, someone doesn't make it. The group of chicks so eager to follow you end up losing one of their own after being sucked into the vacuum. The construction workers have to watch as one of their members are dropped onto the body count platform, a dead pawn for puzzle-solving efforts. The malformed and mutilated people in the company building after being dropped from the water end up losing limbs and followers of their own. Then, when you encounter the blob, you first lose your clothes, rendering you naked and vulnerable in front of a whole group of strangers, and then your identity as you're absorbed by the organic mass. This theme of sacrifice is so strong on your side of the game as a player. The company and the society that wears white masks, they're concerned with collection and control. You are concerned with a struggle against power and sacrifice in the pursuit of unity. The succession of death even makes sense when it comes to feelings of attachment to a human being. Animal death, human death, multiple human deaths and suffering, loss of personal identity, and loss of self. Overall, through both player perspective and enemy perspective, there is an overarching theme of using people. Your character uses the mind control helmets provided to make progress up until meeting the underwater creature, who we now know was a previous creation of the company in charge. We spend more than a few moments trying to escape from her attacks underwater, only to be taken down in the end, dragged to the point of dying, and then saved. During the course of the game, we just took advantage of other people and creatures when we needed something. The chicks, the pig, the people. When faced with dying and in desperate need, the impossible was actually granted to us by the kind of being who we'd been using all along to meet our end goal. It's from this point that not only can we breathe underwater, we actually don't even need the mind control helmets to work with any groups. They just follow us without question. And in the end, the player character makes the ultimate sacrifice to rescue the people trapped in the organic mass, giving back to the beings who had helped him reach this point. Whenever you have a dystopia setup like this, you have at least two groups, the oppressors and the oppressed. The oppressors of this world wear the white masks and herd others along, turning them into mind slaves for labor and possible use as organic weapons. Looking at the pair who watch the cage of slaves being lifted from the warehouse area, we can see that one of them appears to be a child, as were many who had been watching the march earlier of new slaves. In this world, I think it's possible that members of the upper class might be able to purchase mind slaves for their own use. This whole scene with the forklift seems like a purchase rather than some employee of the company redirecting product who just happened to have their child with them at the time. These two are holding hands, and the shorter person is half the height of the other. There's no way this isn't a child and parent. In a world where a company can imprison people and use them as mental slaves and organic modeling clay, the dystopia presents itself as a serious upper-class versus lower-class society. Our player character is clearly one of the lower-class members who escaped capture, and his fellow members of society, now enslaved, have fallen even farther down the hierarchy. Along his path into the building of the company, the boy is confronted with several statements about community and class. In losing a chick while solving your first puzzle, you face the sacrifice of animals. While using groups of construction workers who have become mind slaves for the company, you meet the sacrifice of human beings in a lower class than you. After nearly drowning and then being turned into a modified human, the player character reaches a state of acceptance by the community of company-modified humans through an act of compassion and outreach. And then, as an underwater breather and someone who has been made different by the company's work as well, the character walks among the captured people as a peer until finally, in the act of attempting to free them, the player sacrifices themselves for the benefit of their community. This ultimate expression of unity, the mass of people combined into one body, all abused by the upper class, then goes on a rampage against its captor and commits the one and only act of intentional killing on the player's side in the entire game, the assassination of a corporate ruler. The mass body then fights for its freedom, is denied through entrapment, and then fights its way through again until finally escaping to a patch of sunlight in a very dark world. As for the other ending, with the final unplugging of the master mind control helmet and the shutdown of the player character, that feels like an extension of the theme of control seen throughout the game. The insinuation here does feel like a statement on how the player is using their mind control helmet on the boy, even as he's being used as an agent of freedom to make the mind control devices stop working. It's such a vague ending because it raises a question about a very difficult topic. Just how free is someone, really? If our character was a puppet the entire time, even for good intentions, what does that say about free will? What does that say about someone's actions? Was it even us, the player, controlling the boy, or someone else in the dystopia trying to topple the company's power? Themes of control and the use of living beings as tools exist all throughout the game, as well as themes of community, dystopia, and the oppressed engaging in an uprising against the oppressor. There is a lot to this game when it comes to artistic meaning. It says quite a few things without saying anything at all, leaving everything up to visual storytelling and making connections. It is a dark, weird, twisted, and wonderful bit of indie game art and storytelling, and Inside was just fun in general. Sometimes scary and at all times clever and interesting, it's a good experience. I often found myself laughing at just how clever some of the puzzles turned out to be, and fascinated by the depth of such a carefully detailed 3D world presented in 2D. This is impressive work that challenges itself by its way of storytelling, and there just aren't many things out there like it. I don't play side-scrollers or platformers, but I have no complaints. I enjoyed my time with Inside, and I understand the hype. As for that title, Inside, when it comes to one-word titles to media like this, you can find 100 different ways to interpret it, but the best I can put forward is that it's called Inside because you're inside of the dystopia trying to work your way out, and in the end, you pull a reverse maneuver and dig yourself deeper in. You go inside the organic mass, the heart of danger created by the terror that rules this world in order to break out, and that act has a lot of meaning in itself. With games like these, with basically nothing being said by the developers on what it means, what the story was inspired by, or anything even beyond the basic, it's very open to interpretation. This is a title that doesn't even have dialogue, text you can read for information on the world build or story, and the game doesn't even offer you instructions on how it works. Inside is very much built to be an art piece. You come to the experience, you go through as much of it as you want, and you come out with an impression you're meant to examine for meaning. My interpretation may differ from yours, but that's the beauty of the art. I did the best I could using the information provided by the game itself to reach my conclusion. You might find a fit that's much better, or find visual storytelling clues that make things much clearer than those I found. No matter what, Inside is a keeper and an inspiration to be had. There's a lot of positive things to be said for visual storytelling, and having Playdead Studio around as such a major player in the indie market is a very good thing indeed. Thanks for joining me in the dark again this evening. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Inside, feel free to hit the like button and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more videos on dark, mysterious, psychological, and horror-based games in the near future. The horror game release season is almost here, and it's going to be exciting. Once more, I'm Nick Nocturne, and like a horrible containment breach you thought could only happen once, I'll be back again real soon. Sleep tight.